Stop that or you'll go blind. Misunderstanding causality. Years ago, when our family of 3 generations used to celebrate Christmas together, it used to be a joke between my sister and me that we would serve non-alcoholic punch to my mother, who would be told that it was alcoholic and who would subsequently become tipsy. This is a pretty clear example of the placebo effect. Because my mother believed that she was consuming something that would make her tipsy, she obliged by becoming tipsy. I'm sure she believed this, and that it affected her in a way that she expected alcohol to affect her. Of course, this is a common effect in trials of new medication. Believing that a medication may improve your condition can actually improve your condition, which shows the amazing power of the mind, or of the connection between the mind and the body. So if you're going to demonstrate the effectiveness of a medication, you have to control for this placebo effect. Scientists will use double-blind trials. Neither the subject nor the researcher know whether a particular individual is receiving the real medication or a placebo. The researcher, because knowing this may affect their interpretation of what's going on. So this is one example of the ways in which we can misunderstand causality. As the subject of this experiment, we think we're receiving medication for our condition. We experience some improvement. We think the medication is working. However, if we are actually receiving the placebo, this is actually something which our own mind is causing. The other obvious way in which we tend to get confused about causality is because of correlation. Two things can be correlated without either causing the other, or we can think that A is causing B when actually B is causing A. There's a website maintained by someone called Tyler Vigen where he graphs various spurious and hilarious correlations. I'll leave a link to his web page below, and this is where I'm taking these images that I'll present in a moment. For example, there's a direct correlation between the distance of Saturn from the Sun and how many Google searches are conducted on how to make a baby. There's also a direct correlation between the popularity of the first name Stevie and the price of Lululemon stocks. True. Hopefully none of us think that these events are actually causally linked, but, well, I can imagine how easy it would be to construct some kind of conspiracy theory, or maybe even a religion, on the basis of either of these factoids. Of course, people do believe equally silly things based not on actual but spurious correlations like these, but just on imagined correlations. Astrology comes to mind. Homeopathy is another. In the first instance, as in many other cases, people only notice when it seems to work. For example, if astrology predicts that Sagittarians like to butter their toast on whichever side is slightly darker, believers will only have to find one instance of that to confirm their belief. In the case of homeopathic medicine, there is of course the placebo effect in the first place, but there's also the fact that if someone takes some homeopathic medication for, say, a head cold, if this clears up completely within 7 to 10 days, they'll likely attribute this to the medication, despite the fact that it would have cleared up on its own within that time anyway. Does holding such beliefs sound silly to you? Well, no argument from me. Although, maybe we all hold some such beliefs. Superstition is a common type of such beliefs, as if crossing our fingers or touching wood is actually going to have some effect on the outcome of events. But maybe we don't quite believe that, do we? It can be difficult to establish direct causality between two events, and it's sometimes easier just to assume it than to rigorously confirm or deny it. Assuming it probably works well enough in most situations, or at least it causes no harm. Making quick judgments like that has probably been favoured by evolution. Often there's no time to test whether it's truly a causal effect, or there's no satisfactory methodology available for doing so. If our friend dies after he eats those red berries from that particular tree, maybe it's best if I don't eat them, even though we can't be sure that that's actually the cause of his death. In fact, maybe we'd better avoid all red berries. It turns out that evolution has made red a kind of warning colour in the natural world, so much so that plants will develop red berries in order to pretend that they are poisonous. Red is a signal for the presence of toxins, but it then becomes a potentially false signal because of this mimicking. But I digress. It's the safer option to avoid red berries if someone who eats red berries from that tree subsequently dies, even though they may actually have died from other causes. Maybe they had a heart attack. Assuming causality is favoured by evolution, and we do it a lot. We also overestimate our own powers of causality. For instance, if we find ourselves wishing that someone was dead and they subsequently die, we can scarcely prevent ourselves from believing that we somehow caused their death. Somehow is a good enough explanation in those circumstances. Faulty logic can also result in the misapplication of causality. For example, let's suppose that the proposition all poisonous berries are red is true. It's not true, but let's assume for argument's sake that it is. All poisonous berries are red. We might then come to the logically fallacious conclusion that all red berries are poisonous. Now, this doesn't follow logically at all, but this is an easy trap to fall into. Easy is the key word here. We tend to, we're evolutionarily predisposed to take the easy path. We're basically mentally lazy, which works for us often enough for evolution to have favoured this approach. We can take the more difficult path of rigorously thinking something through rather than taking it on face value. We can even do actual science to test various hypotheses. Science is in fact a way for us to override our natural propensities. But most of the time, most of us won't do that. We'll take the easy path. All of these natural tendencies, which have been favoured by evolution, have been amplified by social media, where wild, unsubstantiated claims can go forth and multiply. And it's become much more difficult to differentiate between the wheat and the chaff. And we need to be able to do that more than ever. The inability or unwillingness to think critically has become something of an epidemic in our society. When we're being bombarded by so much information and misinformation, it becomes all the more urgent, but also all the more difficult to apply critical thinking. Who has the time or the inclination? I think that to combat this, we have to be introducing critical thinking to children at a much earlier age and across a wide range of disciplines. We need to train children so that it becomes a habit, so that it becomes second nature, the way that taking the easy path already is for most of us irredeemable adults. For that reason, I was pleased to see that the UK government intends to introduce critical thinking into the school curriculum across all disciplines. This follows the recent riots in the UK in reaction to the Southport knife attacks of a few weeks ago. A lot of misinformation, a lot of conspiracy theories arose following that episode. And of course it resulted in these terrible riots. The idea is to equip children with the skills to be able to recognise conspiracy theories and misinformation. I'll keep my fingers crossed that this works because, you know, my fingers are pretty powerful.